Welcome to Start Here, the interviews. It's a series where I talk to some of our customers who've not only had firsthand experience with our products, but are having firsthand experiences dealing with the challenges posed by all the risks facing our access control systems today. I'm your host, Sarah Bowling, and my guest today is Matt Netardus. He's from Security 101 in Hampton Roads, Virginia. And we'll be talking about where do you start when you're getting off Prox. All right. Hey, Matt, nice to see you. Thank you for coming back.
Appreciate you having me back.
This is actually part 2 of an episode that we started last week, our brand new series called Start Here, the Interviews. And we were having a conversation about low frequency prox, the risks associated with that technology, and how you've really approached that with your customers who are still using legacy prox, and how you're transitioning them off. And you've deployed some pretty ingenious tactics from a business perspective to start encouraging your customers to start making that migration. At the end of our call, we started moving into kind of the next big bucket issue that our company is focusing on this year, and that's going Osdp, which stands for Open Supervised Device Protocol. And it's actually an official standard that's been named by SIA, Security Industry Association, in actually May of 2020. I actually thought it was a lot older than that. So I think there's been some, when did you first learn about Osdp?
That was just a little over a year prior, about a year and a half prior to it being named an actual standard is when we started to hear about it.
So how did you hear about it? How did you start adopting it? Did you start adopting it right away, or what was the perception within your organization, and how did you approach it?
Yeah, so we first heard about it just like we do most new things out at ISC West. Originally, it was very much a tactical decision for us to start utilizing this for some key sets, namely elevator and gate access control, where the technology limits and the distance limits of WeGAN were really solving or causing some immediate issues for us. So we brought on OSDP for those solutions in particular to kind of get past those technological challenges.
And limits, sorry, I forgot to talk to you about this before. So the limits being with WeGAN, what, 500 feet? And then
yes.
Is it 4,000 for OSD for RS485? That's what we're looking at.
It's a couple thousand. And the benefit there is not only just that it can go, multiple times as far, it's that it needs less conductors as well. So in a case like elevators or a gate solution where there may be a fixed number of conductors available and conductor count is very minimal, you now have a lot more flexibility to still provide the higher level functions of that reader with a substantially lower number of conductors.
So, and we got so ahead of ourselves here. So OSDP is a new communication protocol, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, that runs between the reader and the panel. And so that's what you were talking about, running into problems with distance and performance. So initially, I think the standard was defined to solve some other problems, particularly security issues, risks that run with unencrypted unidirectional data wires, which has now been resolved with OSDP being bidirectional and totally encrypted, and also some other issues which I want to hear about from your perspective. So it's interesting to me that how you first approached OSDP was with a need that was basically design based and performance based. It had nothing to do with security. Yeah, interesting. Okay.
We got a little bit lucky that circumstances kind of pushed us toward the early versions of OSDP prior to it becoming the formal standard, and really got us looking at it when we otherwise may not have for a little while longer. So because we now had some OSDP out there in the field, we needed to put some of it in our test labs so that we knew how to react to it. And once we had it in our test lab and found out all the other things that it can do, from that bidirectional communication, which is a huge deal when we're talking about maintenance, health checks, making sure that those readers are operating properly, all the way to the security benefits, to the future potentials that they have. Once we kind of got OSDP working where we had it in that test bench, we had a couple case studies out there. we really identified that, hey, this is the next thing. It may not be a formal standard there when we started using it day one, but it was pretty easy to see right off the bat that this compared to weekend, there really is just no comparison there.
So let's talk about some of the other total cost to serve benefits that you've found through your evaluation and your deployment of OSDP, and with your panels of choice, because when we can maybe sort of finish with the security reasons. But let's talk about the
Absolutely.
total cost to serve benefits. So you mentioned a couple of them, but maybe you can indulge me in a few more details.
Yeah, so that bidirectional communication means that not only is the reader sending data to the controller in the form of card swipes, but it's also giving and receiving information from that controller on a more consistent basis. And so we are now able to identify whether that reader is still functioning properly, and lots of other things that previously, diagnosing it if a reader went bad was typically done by the user accidentally using when it was dead, and no one at the head end knew until someone complained. And the problem there is if you have a reader that doesn't get a lot of traffic, you may not know for a month, 2 months that has been dead. That user reports that, hey, I came into this store. That may have been an issue that's been going on for a long period of time, and no one just knew about it. And now it's a major disruption because they don't have a replacement on standby, and they didn't know that was something that needed to be fixed until a user was impacted.
And so you're saying now you're able to get live health checks.
Yep. So now we are able to, both for our managed systems and for our clients who self-manage their platforms, they're able to do those health checks, create alarms, manage their readers to make sure that not only are they physically powered up, but they are actually responding properly on a day-to-day basis. And if a reader goes down, they know about it when it goes down, not when a user is impacted by being unable to get through the door.
So real-time updates. What about, I know one of the important features for us, our products, our Wavelynx readers have gone through the certification process with SIA to become OSDP verified. We're one of the few reader companies who are totally OSDP verified. And on top of that, one of the few companies in that bucket who can actually support something called file transfer. So this allows you to completely update the firmware in your reader or change the configuration in your reader remotely via OSDP file transfer. Have you had a chance to test that in your lab, or even better, try it in real life on a site?
We have, yes. We've got some sites that, we're a little bit spoiled. For us, a long commute is 35 or 40 minutes. There are definitely other integrators who would look at that as a typical daily or even a short commute. But we do have some clients that we support that some new capabilities came out. We wanted to be deploying those. We also wanted to be more fully utilizing the mobile capabilities of readers and to be able to push that out from a central location, central for me being in my office without having to get in the car. I was able to get into that platform and push those out there. I didn't have to put a person there. We didn't have to get access to that building, which at the time was closed due to COVID. We were able to push that entire update without anyone on site, without anyone taking readers off the walls, without anyone power cycling stuff. It was a really streamlined method of doing that was much more in line with how we update computers remotely. Exactly. Rather than a lot of the access control hardware that up until this point meant you're taking a tour of that campus and touching every door, unplugging stuff, power cycling stuff. The amount of time that it saved is really, it's hard to kind of conceptualize how much easier it is to push a button on a computer sitting in my office compared to getting in the car, driving out there, getting access to the building, walking door to door, panel to panel. It was a 5-minute thing, what could have been half a day.
And I think you mentioned even in some of the larger applications, in an enterprise, for example, where there are hundreds of readers, you said it's really easy to miss a reader as well. I mean,
it is, yeah. So 100% compliance and updating firmware is really challenging. especially if you're not getting all of that two-way data, if you're not able to check and make sure that stuff actually happened. Being able to centralize that and push that out makes it a lot easier, because computers miss stuff a lot less often than human beings do. So beyond the time, it's a higher percentage of completion. We have more confidence, and both of those put together means we're much more likely to actually complete those updates. Whereas most places probably haven't updated firmware as they should have, because it's just so painful to do that they decide not to.
Yeah, it seems that's been a really popular sell point, I guess, when I've been talking to integrators such as yourself. It's just such a huge total cost to serve benefit to be able to eliminate all of that true time work that you've otherwise spent on site. So we've talked about how OSDP solved some early issues for you, just in terms of performance in the design setup, and now also some of the total cost to serve benefits you get just in terms of time, getting your time back, and also maybe being more accurate in your updates, and also, like you said, executing them. So that brings us to, security. So I don't know if those of you who are watching are familiar, the difference in terms of security between traditional weekend wiring and OSDP protocol is that weekend wiring is typically unencrypted, unidirectional in nature, as we know, so it's only carrying messages one way to the panel, and those wires themselves are unencrypted, which means that data can actually be easily skimmed. And so part of the OSDP protocol was that this communication protocol is bi-directional in nature, and it's secured with AES 128 encryption, so it can no longer be skimmed. Does that bring any sort of peace of mind to you? Is that an added value to you? Have you ever seen any breach happen? I mean, how important is it to you, really? You can be honest.
Yeah. So for us, really, the easiest thing to communicate to the end users was the maintenance, because although our red team testers who actually test the vulnerabilities of physical systems are able to put in the cricket devices to repeat signals and do playback attacks to then grant themselves access. And we've done that before. Typically, right off the bat, the maintenance part is what resonates with the end users more. But security nowadays is evolving much more like the IT world, where security of security is much more of a buzzword. We see that with everything from camera manufacturers locking down their firmwares and their cameras, to software manufacturers improving how they handle their own security, all the way down to the part that is, at the end of the day, the one that interacts with users most often. That reader is going to have a physical touch point or an interaction with your card users and your system users more often than any other part of your system. So more people are going to have access to that reader than will ever have access to your server. And so we've been, as an industry, back in the past, where that was a huge vulnerability, and there was nothing you could do about that with weekend. You can't secure that. There's very little that can really be done to prevent someone from potentially interacting with that. Whereas now with OSDP, it's just a built-in feature. You have that security. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to do anything. It's just there.
So what's happening next? Where do you go in the future? How are you taking this into your business? Are you able to start upgrading legacy customers now into OSDP as well? Or are you still just focusing on new opportunities when you're deploying OSDP? What's your approach with your business? Because I know you think things out very methodically into how you're going to
try to.
Yeah.
So really the biggest thing for us is making sure that we're putting out the right door hardware, that such as we never have to go back to that door. So even if we have a system where the hardware or the software at that time may not be something that's capable of handling OSDP, which, OSDP is still a very new standard. So it's not something that 100% of the systems can do, especially day one. So even in a case where we do have an advanced system, it may not be OSDP compatible today. So we want to make sure that any of the new doors and any of the reader replacements that we're doing to start to support the higher frequency cards, we're putting the reader out there in a way that it can be very easy to convert that, or in Wavelynx's case, auto detect that and move straight to OSDP.
With this.
So that way we don't have to deploy a reader that can be capable of OSDP. then in a separate work effort, work on upgrading the panels or the software, the firmware to accept that. But then even though we have both sides ready, potentially having to go back out to that door, we don't want to do that. So making sure that we have that door fully ready so that once that head end is ready, it just deploys itself, is really a big kind of looking out for the future thing that we're trying to do.
Well, so thank you for bringing up Wavelynx auto detect. So let's just put a spotlight on it. How has your experience been using the Wavelynx reader with the built-in auto detect? How has that experience been in ease of deployment, in using the same wires and then connecting a new panel? Is it as easy as we tell you as it is?
It was easy enough that I trained the first project manager that was going to do our first Wavelynx, and we used a Mercury panel for that installer. He went out, I trained him, got him used to what OSDP is, went through all that stuff. Well, luck being luck, he wasn't the guy who went out on site the next day. That the person that did go out on site deployed it all correctly, had no idea he had just deployed a OSDP system compared to a weekend system until he got back to the office that afternoon. I said, hey, look at this cool stuff. Look at what I have. And then he realized, we just deployed OSDP. So it really was just as plug and play as, the installation is no different than weekend. As long as your system's ready for it, it's nothing.
Awesome. So it's a standard and it's a feature that you approve of. You think it's moving forward in the right direction in terms of solving access control system risks?
Yes, that is a needed thing. We are treating OSDP in a very similar manner to how we have been treating proximity. That move from weekend to OSDP is no longer if you bring it up yourself, Mr. End User. It is we are going to heavily recommend that. You're going to have to convince us not to do that. And for the users that just, even if they don't notice, we're going to deploy OSDP right out of the box every time anyway. And if it's a system that can't support OSDP right now, we're going to make sure to put readers there that could support it and that, accept that OSDP protocol as soon as it is there and available. And that way we don't have to go back out. We don't have to convince them it's a good idea. We as the security experts know this is the way of the future. This is the way that all readers should be deployed. So we can just deploy them the right way and let the end users go about their business.
Awesome. Well, so I think that's unless you have any parting thoughts on OSDP, I was going to do.
Well, the easiest thing for us and the most enticing for me is I love read in, read out doors, especially as it relates to area occupancy. Now that we're keeping track of how many people are in specific areas, for any kind of duress situation where you may want to know how many people were in the building, were in this area. Read in, read out is really useful for a lot of different applications. And it is so much easier with OSDP. You're not running a whole nother cable out there because you can daisy chain these readers off of each other. You already have that data circuit out there. Go ahead and just expand on it. It makes it so much easier to then improve the capacity around the door without making it into a big project.
Well, I'm sure Sia will be happy to watch this and hear you sing the praises of OSDP. And I think this will be really helpful. What I wanted to drop in your ear is maybe a part 3, because I'm sure I have a feeling you have some thoughts and feelings about migrating to mobile.
Yes, that is in the game plans as well.
Okay, well, so everyone will have to stay tuned. Maybe we'll get together next week and we'll shoot a part 3 and we'll hear what you have to say about migrating your customers to a mobile credential and all of the fun that comes along with, walking around in that Wild West that's happening right now. So if you're up for it, I'm up for it.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, thanks again for your time, Matt. Again, this is Matt Netardus, my guest from Security 101 in Hampton Roads, Virginia, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm your host, Sarah Bowling, from currently snowy North Vancouver, British Columbia, from Wavelynx Technologies. And we look forward to catching up with you again next week. So thanks very much.
Thank you.